Hello again. It's just me. I've had a little bit of a time trying to collect my thoughts to decide for sure what it was I was going to talk about tonight that might be interesting and just, or at the very least entertaining, and at the same time give you a little insight into my life, something that who knows you might be able to use, or at least tell a story around a campfire or at a reunion, or maybe a family dinner or something that you're having sometime whenever these get brought up, if they ever do. Maybe 50 years from now or 100. Anyway, and my thoughts have gone back to the year 1962, if I'm not mistaken. The year 1962 was the year I turned 12 years old. And my birthday was earlier in December. And at Christmas time that year, I got one of the best gifts I've ever received for Christmas. In fact, when I got up that morning and Christmas morning and came out and actually saw it next to where I tied my sock, it really kind of shocked me. I was like, oh my, look at that. I got a .22 rifle. Now, I have to tell you a little bit of the background, because in the place where I lived, the state that I lived in, you could get your hunting license when you were 12 years old. And I'm sure my parents knew that, and me being a farm boy and with friends that would probably do some hunting anyway, they figured out and took a chance that I would be able to be careful, I guess you'd say. And they bought me a .22, and it was a little different than your average .22 because it was a single shot, 22 caliber single shot bolt action, which meant that every time you shot a shot, you had to stop and pull the bolt back and put another shell in it, and then put the bolt back in place and shoot again. So it wasn't meant for rapid fire. And what that led me to do was understand that if I didn't hit the first time, whatever I was shooting at would be gone before I got it reloaded. And I'm sure my parents knew that too. But it kind of challenged me because I had heard my mother talk about her brothers, and her father made them a deal because squirrels were just terrible. I've told you before, squirrels were just all over the fence lines, running across the roads, eating the crops. They were just a menace. Even the grasses they'd eat at certain times of the year and just be a pest. And they seemed to be just everywhere. Well, my mother's brothers had made a deal with their dad, and I never did know him. He died before I came around, but they'd made a deal with their dad that if he'd buy them one box of 22 shells, that they would go shoot his squirrels, which he was all in favor of. But he wasn't in favor of buying a bunch of bullets that never hit their target. So here's the deal that he made. He said, if you'll bring me back a squirrel tail, I'll give you another bullet for that squirrel tail, which means every bullet had to hit their target or you'd run out of shells, right? So I was always a little intrigued at that story. So when I found out I got a single shot, I thought, heck, I can do as good as they can. And so we had squirrels. Trust me, we had squirrels just about everywhere we went. There were still squirrels around. And my dad had bought this farm, was trying to put it under production, and the squirrels were an uphill battle for him, and he didn't have time to fight the battle, so he kind of put me on it. And I can remember sighting that 22 in with some cans and some targets, and to where I felt like I could really hold that rifle well and brace it so that it didn't wiggle, and put the bead right on whatever I was shooting at, and squeeze the trigger slowly, and bang, and it would pretty much hit the target as long as I didn't get the range of the target or whatever I was shooting at too far away. Because one of the things you have to do when you're shooting is understand what they call ballistics, and that is how fast the bullet comes out and how far it will carry before it starts to drop, and all those kinds of things. You study those for each grain of bullet and each caliber that you have, and all of them are a little different. So I paced to study those, and I did. And this 22 that I got gave me a lot of outdoor experience. I enjoyed getting out. I enjoyed being alone. And it was something that challenged me a little bit, gave me something to get me out and about when I had a little downtime. And in the spring of the year, when the squirrels were really out, my father used to really encourage it, because he was pretty happy that I was getting them. If a squirrel had little ones, then before fall came, you didn't just have the adult squirrels. You had a bunch of little ones that were causing problems. So it was kind of like a plague that we had with squirrels, and I saw myself as being part of the answer to that plague now that I had a 22 single shot. And so anyway, it was a first for me, and for some reason I've thought a little bit about firsts as I've gone through the last several days. I've seen some things that I won't even attempt to get sidetracked onto them right now, but I've seen some things where people have experienced firsts, and it seems like all of them react just a little differently. And I've been in the back of my mind thinking a little bit about some of the firsts that I've had and what I was able to learn from them. And the one with the squirrels was a first for me. I'd never had a gun before. Oh, I need to mention too that my father also gave me some first training on that rifle. He taught me how to hold it when I walked through the fields, in case I stumbled and fell or whatever, and of course taught me where the safety was. And the rule was that you never, ever, ever pointed a gun at something you didn't want to kill or hit if it was a target. And so, and that went even if the gun was empty, even if there were no bullets in the gun. He taught us that you never, ever pointed a gun at something that you didn't want dead. And of course, people were at the top of that list, and animals and livestock and different things. But he made that understood right off up front, and kind of said it firmly enough that he made a believer out of you, that he had never better catch you pointing it at something that you shouldn't be pointing it at. But then he loosened up after he taught me that, and taught me how if you were crawling through a fence, how you took the gun, and you didn't just take the gun and crawl through the fence. He taught me how to lean it against a post, and then when you get on the other side of the fence, taught me how to approach the gun and make sure that I pulled it through the fence, not barrel first like you see a lot of people do, but how to approach it and get a hold of the gun and bring it through afterwards and make sure that it was safe. So it was something that he took some some interest in making sure that it was done right. And he did that with a lot of the farm equipment that I learned how to run and different things too. So it wasn't out of pattern for him. It was something that he routinely did. Was there's no sense learning how to do something if you're going to learn how to do it wrong and repeat mistakes. And in the case of guns, there might only be one mistake, and he knew that. And so he took some time and was emphatic about how to be safe with guns. So that was in December. Well, I did a little bit of target shooting at juice cans and whatnot, just to make sure that I could sight the rifle in without using too many shells. And then it kind of sat through the winter, and I didn't use it that much. And then when the spring came, I thought, well, I'll get my little 22 single shot and take it down the back road and into the fields and see if I can find a bird or something, see if I could actually hit something that was a little more challenging than a juice can. And so I went down about a quarter of a mile, not even a quarter of a mile from our house, but then that was about the point at which I went through the fence using all the safety that he taught me, and went through the fields. And I can remember it being, I don't know what time of year it would have been, probably April, I want to say early April. There was still some snow drifts, so it must have been a pretty heavy winter, but it was also bare in some spots, and it was quite warm. And off in the field, as I was walking along, I could hear some sandhill cranes. I don't know if you've ever heard of sandhill crane or not, but they make a real high-pitched, kind of ratchety noise, and you can hear them for a long ways away. And so I could hear these sandhill cranes off in the distance, and I thought, well, I'll just see if I can sneak up on one of them. And the sandhill cranes, by the way, stood about 3.5 feet tall, maybe more, I don't know. But they were pretty big birds. They had long legs, long beak. You'd have to look them up and get a picture of them. You might even be able to hear a sound if you Google it or something. But I could hear these sandhill crane off in the distance, and I started to put the sneak on it. So I was officially a hunter now. I was crouching around and trying to make sure that they didn't see me before I saw them, and went out into the fields. And I finally saw the sandhill crane. It was just over on the next knoll there in the field. And every now and then it put its head down like it was trying to eat something, maybe some grain or something that had been left from the previous fall's harvest. And occasionally it'd hold its head up, and I'd just stop moving. I'd just freeze. Then when it went to eating again, I'd start putting crouching up on it. Kind of like you see those big cats do out on the Serengeti, They move up on their prey when they're not looking, and as soon as they look, they stop. Well, that's kind of what I was doing. I guess I had a little bit of hunter instinct in me or something, but the story doesn't stop there, because I actually decided that I was close enough that maybe I could take a shot at that sandhill crane. Now, nobody told me that sandhill cranes were off hunting limits, that there was actually, they were actually protected birds, and I shouldn't be shooting them. Dad didn't teach me that, along with the safety mechanisms on the gun and how to crawl through a fence with one and all that. He didn't say what I could shoot and what I couldn't, and so I didn't know. So I went after this sandhill crane and finally got to a spot where it was dry, and I leaned down and propped my hands on the ground, took a real fine bead on the I didn't have a scope, it was just open sights. Took a real fine bead and and just squeezed it off like I'd practiced with the juice cans. Bam. That sandhill crane dropped right in its tracks. Fluttered just a bit on its way down, and it was toast. Whew, that was quite a shocker for me because I hadn't killed anything like that. The last thing I'd killed was a BB gun, and it was a sparrow, and I even shot a bluebird once, I'm ashamed to say. But that was a whole different experience than shooting a sandhill crane with a 22. So there I was over in the field, and I had this sandhill crane, and it was dead. Well, I looked at the bird, and holy cow, it was big. And I could tell it was going to be a trial just to drag it home, but I figured I could do it. And little did I know I should have hit it, because it's against the law, and somebody might catch me and lock me up in jail on my first shot with a 22 because I didn't know any better. That's what happens with first timers, is they don't know any better, and you can get yourself into trouble. I don't know if you've ever been a first timer that's got into trouble or not, but if you stop and think, you've probably experienced it already with some things. Well, so I get the shells out of my gun because I know my hunting's I'm not gonna do any more hunting if I've got to drag this big bird home. Well, I drag it over to the road. And then from the road, there's maybe a half a mile to go to get it to my house. And I can just imagine, because I finally got it to the road, and I just drag it along the edge of the road, and I was puffing and panting and I couldn't just pick it up. I just had to drag it. And there were cars going by. None of them stopped, thank goodness. But I can just imagine what they thought. They thought, holy cow, that kid's breaking the law. Those birds are protected. If the game warden comes along, he's toast. And they'll lock him up. I mean, all these thoughts after I found out they were illegal crossed through my mind. But at the time, I was just happy as could be. Gonna drag that big bird up, show my parents what I had shot. And so I did. Dragged it up the road, across the front lawn, over to the front porch, and laid it on the front porch. I was all give out by then. I went in the house and said, I've been hunting, come see what I got. And it must have been anyway, both of my mom and dad were there. They weren't off working somewhere or doing something else, and they both came out to the front porch, and as soon as they saw that sandhill crane, I can still kind of see the look on their faces. It was just like, you're kidding me, what have you done? And they even asked me that very question, what have you done? And I said, well, aren't you proud of me? I went over in the field and shot this big bird, got it with one bullet, never wasted any others. Aren't you glad that gun really works well? And here you go, you got some meat to eat. And I'm a provider. Firsts. Anyway, we never did eat that sandhill crane because I found out later the way my dad described them, he says, have you ever eaten a sandhill crane? And I said, no, of course not. But they had kind of big breast meat and stuff. He says, this is my dad's word, they're tougher than boiled owl. That's what he said. They're tougher than boiled owl. And I guess he'd eaten one sometime. I don't know. I kind of was reassured that he even knew what they tasted like, because I thought, well, maybe I'm not the only one that killed a sandhill crane. but he didn't talk about that. He just said they're tougher than boiled owl, and get that thing around behind the house so we can get it hid and buried before somebody comes along and gets us all in trouble because of what you've done with your new 22 single shot. And I've never forgotten that experience. That was a first. Let me tell you about another first. Firsts are important because for some reason you just remember them, and if you make a mistake, you don't make the same mistake again the rest of your life. And it's how you learn, is by doing firsts. It was the fall of that same year, and it was deer season. So Octoberish of that same year. And I'd done quite a lot of farm work on the farm. I knew how to drive the machinery and whatnot. Well, one day I can't remember what it was. It seems like we got out of school earlier on one day because I had a little extra time, and I thought it was deer season, and I thought I've got a license, and I can go hunting deer. And I decided that that's what I'd do. And well, the deer were kind of up in the foothills above the little valley there where we lived, and you had to drive a little ways, and I didn't have a driver's license, and nobody would take me. And besides that, I didn't even ask because nobody was around when I got home from school that day. And I thought, there's no sense wasting the afternoon. I'll just go hunting deer. And I got, we had a 30-30 rifle, 30-30 caliber, lever action rifle. It was a Marlin, if I remember right, the brand. And it had open sights too, no scope. We didn't have scopes back in those days, just open sights. And the concept was the same as with my 22. And I thought, well, Dad's shown me how to be careful. And this wasn't a single shot. You could actually put 3 or 4 shells in a magazine and pump the lever action and put another one up into the chamber. And I knew where the safety was and everything. And I had, like I say, quite a longer afternoon. I think it must have only been like a half day of school. So I got on the little Ford tractor that we had. That was my transportation. And got my gun. You had to wear hunter orange when you went hunting so that other people could see you weren't a deer and didn't shoot you. So I'd had that much training, but not much else. And I hadn't shot the gun very many times, just 2 or 3 times, other than the day that I was going on this hunt. And because the shells were quite expensive for 30-30, a lot more than a 22 caliber. And I got on this little Ford tractor and went down the road a 1/4 mile and then up another 1/2 mile up the highway. You call it a highway if you want. They tried to oil it, but it was still a pretty rugged road. And then about another 1/2 mile up there, or even a mile probably, 3/4 of a mile up this dirt road and through some gates, and finally you got into the foothills where the deer would actually be, if there were any. And I had really no idea, other than I talked to my dad about it once, about where the deer might be, and he said, he pointed up some groves up there that were in the foothills, and he says, well, you killed deer out of those groves before. So I went up there and was all energetic and had my shells and everything, went my orange clothing on, and my dad had taught me a little bit about how to hunt deer, and I guess that's why I had the courage to go do it, because he taught me how, and I kind of took that as a go ahead to do it. But we went up into what we called the Kulki Grove, and it was a group of mostly quake and aspens, but had some service berries and different kinds of bushes in it. And then it was a grove that kind of sat on the north slope of a hill. And he told me, he said, if you hunt in those groves, the way you hunt them is that you get up high above the grove. You can't just go walking through the grove because they'll just run out and you'll never see them. You'll just hear them. But if you get up high above the grove and find yourself a perch, should we say, a place where you can watch and sit and just observe, you might see something come out. And he told me, he said, if there's deer in the grove, he said, you and you're patient, then they'll know that you're up there. And after a while, he said, mule deer kind of get nervous. And if you don't move and you don't move, go on up the hill or whatever, if they know you're there, they start getting nervous, and pretty soon they stand up, and then they start looking around, and pretty soon they start moving out of the grove to get away from the danger, I guess they figured they were in. So I did that. The other thing he told me, he says, if you sit there long enough and nothing moves before you move on to the next grove, just get a rock or something and chuck down in the grove after you've been there a while. So I did that. Sat there for a while, nothing moved. And I was thinking about going on up the hill to the next grove. It was quite a hike away, but before I did what he told me to do. I got a rock and threw it down in the grove. Lo and behold, I heard something and tried to look at where the sound was coming from, and off on one side of the grove, coming out of the grove, there was this doe and two fawns. And I need to say right here is that later when I got married, if you'd have shot a doe or a fawn, my wife's family that I hunted with would have run you right out of the family, because that would have been disgraceful. But in our family, it was meat that we were after. And a doe or a fawn, if that's all you could get, was okay. Well, I kind of had that in my mind, and when I saw it, I thought, well, that's a deer. I can shoot that. And so I knelt down, put my rifle over on my elbow on my knee, and knelt down, and I fired a shot, and always aimed it just behind the front shoulder where the lungs and the heart were. And wouldn't you know it, first shot down the deer went. So I had shot here we go again, I'd shot my first deer. I'd shot a first sandhill crane, and now I'd shot a first deer. But I knew the deer was legal because it was deer season. And I went over, I had a pocket knife, I'd come prepared, went over and gutted the deer the way my dad had talked to me about. And it's a little tricky if you haven't done it very often for somebody like a little 12-year-old boy. I was pretty proud of myself to get the entrails out of the deer, and of course your hands are all bloody and everything else. But he told me how to do it, and I did the best I could. Then I had to drag the deer down to where my tractor was parked. And oh, by the way, the deer actually was a fawn. It wasn't a doe. I thought it was the doe when I shot it. But it turned out to be okay because I had to drag it down to the tractor, and that fawn was about all I could drag. And luckily it was kind of downhill. So I made it to the tractor and put my rifle up against the tractor and hoisted the deer up onto the back. They called it a 3-point hitch on the back of the tractor where I could secure it and take it home. So I did. I took it home, just reversed my tracks up there, took it home. When I got it home, it was still early enough in the afternoon that nobody was around, and my dad was still at work over at his creamery job. I'm not sure where my mother was, but she wasn't there. And I decided, well, he taught me how to skin it. He said, you have to cut the scent bags off the legs, and then he told me where to. I don't know why, but when he taught me all these things, I thought, well, he expects me to get the deer, I guess, because I got one. I was putting what he taught me to use, and I actually skinned the deer and did a pretty decent job of skinning it. And it's not easy to do, especially for a first timer, because it's easy to cut through the hide and get hair all over everything. The idea was to keep the meat from getting ruined, which I'd done a pretty good job on the shot. I didn't hit the meaty parts of the deer that we were going to be able to eat. And I hung it up in the garage. And I stood back after I'd got the hide off the deer and put it on a little pulley and pulled it out hind feet up above into the rafters of the garage. And then I went in the house and got some water and kind of washed it down, got rid of some of the blood. And there's places where you have to kind of hit the joints on the legs and take those off. And I had done that. And I was actually pretty proud of myself because there it was. I had meat hanging up in the garage. Just one afternoon's work, and we could eat meat this winter because of my efforts. I'm sure they figured they were maybe going to get another one or two. But anyway, for a little 12-year-old kid, I felt like I'd done big time. All on my own, my first. Didn't need any help at all bringing in the meat. And I'll never forget the way my dad made me feel, and my mom too, once she understood what I'd done and came and looked at it. Because he said, I can't believe that you did that. You're just 12 years old, he said. And look at that. You've got a deer. You shot it where you were supposed to shoot it. You took care of the meat and the cleaning and everything, and I can't believe that you followed my instructions to the point that, anyway, he said, I'm just proud of you for being able to do that on your own. So it was a little different than my first with the sandhill crane, because they were disgusted with me then, because it was something I shouldn't have been doing, and I didn't even know it. But in this case, I knew what it was all about, and I did it, and I stood approved with this particular first shooting that I did. Well, those firsts are important. They, for me, even though I made mistakes early on, they kind of helped me move from boyhood into manhood. And I don't like to kill things anymore. I've gone through what Thoreau called the hunter stage of development and come out the other side, and I get no excitement out of killing anything anymore. I just soon let it live. But I can see why he called it the stage of development, because I learned through the experience, and it got me out in nature. And that love of nature is what I took with me more than anything. And to this day, I just love being out in nature and seeing what it can teach me and how I can learn from it. And that's why, if you read the introduction to this MTC channel, Me the Charity, if you read the introduction that I wrote, it talks about a little about that you can observe nature and see truths and experience truths and apply them later on in your life. I'm going to tell you about one other first. This one isn't a hunting first, but it's a first that I'll share just because I think it taught me something, and I've tried to apply it and teach it to others, and so I'll try it here. It's my first year in college, and I was coming home from BYU. I was passing through Heber City, Utah, and I was in a little Plymouth Valiant, you'll have to follow me on this to get a feel for what I experienced. But there was a big semi truck that had pulled up to an intersection on the inside lane at a stoplight, and it had stopped, and the light was red. Well, I was in the lane just to the side of it, and I was coming up on the same stoplight, and just as I started to approach the intersection, I did what most people would do. You'd slow down, but as soon as the light turns green, you think that's go. So then you can speed up a little bit, and I sped up and was going through the intersection. And this truck, of course, trucks are a little slower getting started. This truck, just as I got to where this truck was stopped, and there were two little kids that ran right out in front of the car. And I can remember slamming on my brakes and hearing the tires screech, and the car stopped. And those two little kids, I don't know how old they would have been, maybe 4 or 5. And those two little kids, just a little boy and a little girl, probably a brother and a sister. They just stood there with the eyes just as big as just Google eyes, and just frightened to death. And guess what? Mine were frightened just as much. I never had such a scary moment in my life. And it scares me even more when I thought back on it. Because I thought if I hadn't been alert, if I hadn't been attentive, I would have hit those kids and killed them both. Well, that near accident was a first for me. And in a way, it was like the Sandhill Crane, because after I'd killed that Sandhill Crane and knew what I'd done and it was wrong, you can bet I never killed another one. Well, this accident didn't kill those kids. But the lesson I learned from that I've tried to pass on to my children and grandchildren is, because I thought of it myself as I came away from that experience, I thought, I'm going to treat that experience just the same as if I had hit them and killed them both. Now, can you imagine how traumatic that would have been for me if I'd have actually hit them and killed them both? And I thought, I'm going to treat that experience for me just as much as I can as though I had actually hit and killed them. And the reason I decided to take it to that level was because I realized that it was just lack of experience and understanding that got me in that situation, though it was fairly normal, I think, for me to speed up as I started to go through the intersection. And I can't tell you how many times I've come up on the right-hand side of a truck making a left-hand turn or stopping at an intersection that I haven't slowed right to a snail's pace when I passed that truck and crept into the intersection rather than speeding up, because I had that one experience that almost cost 2 kids their lives and got me into the middle of it. That was a first. Now, I would have told you the story much more dramatically if it had actually happened. But I guess my counsel is, if you have a near miss with anything, whether it's driving or shooting or hunting or relationship near misses or anything that you do that, with fire or explosives or anything where you don't do the right thing and you have a near miss. Sometimes it could be driving a canyon like I've done all my life. I've driven a canyon 50 miles long, 40 miles long all my life, back and forth. And I've never hit a deer in that canyon. Part of the reason I haven't, it's not because they're not there, they're there all the time. But I have I have tried to drive the canyon as though I had actually hit deer there before, as they jumped up from the side of the road in the tall grasses and the weeds where you couldn't see them. And anyway, I would always drive that canyon in a very defensive posture mode, trying to be alert for deer as though I actually had hit them. Now, whenever I say that to my wife, she says, "Don't say that story. We'll hit one on the way home and your luck will run out." And maybe that's so. But when you have near misses in your life, I say maybe it's relationships, maybe it's something you forgot to do. Maybe you didn't turn the stove off, or maybe you went into some black ice where you knew you should have been more careful or whatever. Learn about those things. And if you fishtail or spin or whatever, treat it as though it were not a miss, even though it missed you that time. And you'll save yourself a lot of anguish. I've never driven a car past a semi and not thought about that time that I almost killed 2 kids. So firsts are important. They come in a variety of ways, and we learn from them. I'll tell you one more quick one. I know I'm going a little long here. When I was, I would have been about 9, I guess, 9, maybe 10. We were in what was an old church up in Liberty, Idaho. It was about to be torn down to make a new one. But we combined our congregations down there, and we were all attending one. And I can remember another first that I had, and it was kind of a downhill walk from the seats in the congregation, the pews, I guess you'd call them, although they weren't pews, they were more like chairs, and down to the pulpit, just a gradual decline. Well, they'd have what they call fast and testimony meeting, and people would be able to just stand up and say what they thought about the Lord and sit down. So there were actually some pretty interesting things that were taught, and you kind of felt the spirit of things. I always liked those meetings. And they'd always encourage you to stand up and bear your testimony. Anyway, when I was about 9 or maybe early 10-year-old, somehow I got the idea that I could actually walk up there to the pulpit and say my testimony and come down like everybody else did. Everything would be just fine. And I didn't really ask permission or tell anybody I was going to do it. I just had a feeling, and I thought, well, that must be the Spirit telling me what to do. And so I was sitting on an aisle seat toward the back, and again, a little bit inclined, the aisleway was. And I just felt this urge to go bear my testimony, and it didn't leave. And I thought, well, I'll go do that. I guess I'll just go do it. And I can remember suddenly getting the courage up, because I'd never done anything like that before. It was at first. And I started up toward that pulpit. Well, I got maybe 10 or 12 yards down the row and was getting closer to where the pulpit was. And I pulled my head up, and I got this frightful feeling that came over me. And I turned around, because now everybody had seen that I was partway up there. Anyway, I just turned around and I ran just as hard as I could back to my seat. So that was my first time bearing my testimony. Now, I could have taken that and said, that's done. I'm done with that experience. I'll never do that again, because it was kind of embarrassing. You can imagine. And I did. I took the approach, said, it's going to be a long time before I bear my testimony again. Well, I can't remember when I did it. I think it actually was several years after that. But I finally got around to bearing it. And now, every chance I get, I bear my testimony until I finally, it dawned on me that I wasn't giving other people the chances that they need. So somehow I clawed my way out of that frightening moment and built up some more courage, and I've borne testimony of Jesus Christ lots of times. I felt it then, and it scared me. The whole experience did. And I'm not sure why. You'd think, well, gosh, if the Lord actually wants you to bear testimony of him, then wouldn't he help you? Well, maybe he did, but in a different way than I expected. And I think that quite often happens with our firsts. We can't let him get us down. Unless it's something like a sandhill crane that maybe we shouldn't be repeating again. But firsts in life are important things. I'm grateful for parents that let me experience firsts. I'm grateful for events that have taught me through first experiences what to do and not to do, whether I should be more careful, whether I should repeat, whether I should polish, whether I should improve. Sometimes it comes different ways, but don't be afraid of firsts, however they come. I've always said, hold your head up, put your face to the wind, and just go ahead and experience your first. Load up that single shot and fire away. Oh my, I'm lucky I'm not in jail. Bye. Love you.